Hello, I'm Steve Barrett, Chairperson for Ipswich Aware, and I'm very excited to tell you about the program you're about to see. We wanted to create a frank review of the mental health and substance use problems among our youth, and how we can do better as a community to help our children to address them. We found our guide to address these issues in Michelle Lipinski, an extraordinarily intelligent and inspired teacher and leader who spoke with us last week. Our program addresses hard issues that may be very sensitive and trigger strong feelings. Our speaker will touch on childhood abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, sexual identity struggles, and anxiety and fear created by school shootings and gun violence. These topics can be hard to hear, but are strongly tied to depression, anxiety, substance use, and teen suicide, and are much more common than we would like to think. But our program also describes what works for these kids, what we can do more of as a community to turn the rising tide of mental health disorders and substance use among our children. It's a guide for professionals and teachers, but also for parents, caregivers, and concerned community members on what we can do. So strap in, it moves fast, and be prepared to be informed and inspired. Hello, and welcome to the third recorded presentation from Ipswich Aware about youth substance use prevention. I am Dr. Steve Barrett, and I'm joined as usual by Dr. Carl Soderlund, longtime primary care physician in Ipswich. As we all know, the teen years are very challenging for parents, but also for teens. Physiologically, emotions and hormones are raging, brain connections are still forming, while developmentally, teens are dealing with a wider than ever array of temptations and life options, especially since the explosion of social media. Missteps and unhealthy choices are almost certain. So how can we as parents, caregivers, and teachers best support and guide them through these turbulent years? Today, we're privileged to have a nationally known speaker who has some answers to that question and has developed several very important programs in our North Shore area to provide a lifeline for troubled teens. Michelle Lipinski is the founder and principal of the North Shore Recovery High School located in Beverly. She's licensed as a science teacher, a principal and director, special education director, and superintendent. She has over 25 years of experience as a principal and director in alternative school settings, and is also a recovery advocate. She speaks across the country about the philosophy and mission of creating adolescent substance use and mental health recovery support in academic settings. She is also a strong advocate for combining a supportive therapeutic milieu with rigorous academic standards for students with significant risk factors. Due to her unique perspective on these issues, Michelle has been featured on ABC, CNN, NBC, NECN, Anderson Cooper, and Current TV, as well as other media outlets across the country, including TEDx, and most recently, an amazing 4-point documentary on MTV called 16 and Recovering. As if that weren't enough, Michelle began the I Can Help program operated through her nonprofit, Potential Connections. I Can Help trains engaged community members to be resources for adolescents struggling with substance abuse and mental health issues. She created this in response to the number of students who are unable to connect with a trusted adult and consequently never receive the essential services they need to live productive and healthy lives. Most recently, she started the PASS, P-A-S-S program with many of her local school districts, North Shore YMCA, and behavioral health providers. This program offers a non-punitive, restorative approach to student discipline for 10 school districts on Boston's North Shore. Today's presentation and subsequent discussion with our local school counselors and administrators will address the question, how do our children know that they matter? I would also encourage everyone to watch the presentation to the very end to see a very moving video that was made about Michelle's work. And so, welcome, Michelle.
It feels like such a tall order to fill. That's a long bio. Thank you so much for having me. I really am very honored to be here and to be able to kind of talk about my experiences, strength and hope with most of you and those of you at home. So first of all, I would like to know, like, why did you tune in today? What is it about this information that you want to know? Like, take a minute to reflect on who you're thinking of as you kind of think about this, why you're actually watching this program right now. Is it a person? Is it something that's happened to you? Something that you're seeking to find out more? So we're trying to use these opportunities to practice skills needed to do this work with our student and families. So we're going to use these stories and these feelings and these moments to remember the importance of the work we're doing and really remembering the why. So who am I? I mean, you kind of just did all that for me, so I don't really have to do that anymore. But why am I here today? So, you know, it was a couple years ago, I was at a Boston Red Sox game, and then I was with a person, and he goes, so what's your walk-up song? And I was like, what do you mean a walk-up song? I didn't even realize until, like, I'm 56. At 54 years old, I realized that every single baseball player has a walk-up song. I didn't know that. So I thought long and hard about like what my walk-up song would be when I need to do hard things like this, right? Going in front of people that I don't even know and talking about my philosophy, which doesn't always adhere with similar philosophies. So anyway, so my walk-up song when I was thinking of it is, and you'll see this on the YouTube video, is the Eminem song, I'm Not Afraid. And most of you know what that is, and it's to take a stand, to, I almost have to sing it, but now I can't. But anyway, together through the storm, in any weather, cold or warm, let me know that you're not alone. So really this whole thing is about letting people know that they're not alone. So everyone should have a walk-up song, whether you're walking into an IEP meeting, that's gonna be tough, whether you're walking into a meeting with a parent or a guardian, or you are a parent, just walk in and have something that's like threading through your head that makes you feel stronger than you were before. But I do believe that we have the answers necessary to solve this opioid and suicide epidemic if we work together, which, you know what, that's a huge piece of this, is we have to work together. Because we have to break down the silos that are currently available right now and the competition for resources and accepting the status quo. So we need to build a model that addresses the developmental needs of adolescents who struggle with mental health and substance use issues. And I say this, I call it the serotonin summer camp. So I have a 17-year-old, I have 3 children, 25, 23, and 17. And my 17-year-old was struggling. He, one of his friends was struggling, and I get a call from him. And he said, Michelle, can you come pick me up? And I said, sure, you need to talk. And he goes, I need to talk. So I pick him up, I'm not gonna tell you his name. When I go and talk, I like to go down by the beach by Rye. So we're sitting at the beach, and I know this kid, he's really struggling, and he's just kind of hyperverbal. My best work is done like next to a person, not front to, so we're always driving if I have to have a hard conversation with somebody. So this young man, he was 16 at the time, struggling with the substance use and a lot of mental health issues. And I looked at him and I said, when was the last time you were happy? It was a lot, like, what do you need? Like, what is it? And he said, summer camp. And I'm thinking about all these treatment programs that are like in hospital settings, that, I mean, although they have phenomenal people working there and amazing opportunities for these young people to hear what they need to hear to get through these mental health and substance use challenges, it's not summer camp, right? It's not developmentally appropriate to take a 16-year-old and put him on the 4th floor in a hospital setting where people don't, like, they can't even go outside and play basketball. So I really feel like I really want to encourage people to work together to try to figure out what treatment for these young people looks like, because they need summer camp. They need opportunities to be outside, to be working with one another, hand in hand with camp counselors and people who really do, at the essence of what they do, understand what they're struggling with. So I think we need to build the serotonin summer camp. So here are some objectives for today. Number 1, the latest information just came out for the National Survey for Drug Use and Health. It literally, I think, just came out last week, if not maybe a week and a half ago. We're going to review some of that data to kind of set the table for why we need to do this. We're going to talk about some of the barriers for mental health and substance use. We're going to talk a little bit about liminal space, which is a book that a friend of mine sent to me, written by Heather Plett, Mattering Theory and Social Learning Theory. We're going to talk about community connectedness, and then lastly, we're going to talk a lot about creating safe spaces for people in our communities to find trusted adults. So this is the big one, right? Anything vaping. That everyone that I talked to, the reason I started this PASS program was because I worked with a bunch of school districts and they saw the onslaught of what was happening with our adolescents who started vaping about 5 or 6 years ago. And they were like, oh crap, this is coming down. The students are vaping. And this is even before the THC vaping. This was just for nicotine vaping, not just. It was for nicotine vaping. But what we saw was that it's falling on the hands of these administrators to have to figure out what to do with adolescents who are in our schools vaping, right? And so they saw it coming down and they were like, what are we gonna do? So we decided to create an intervention called Positive Alternatives to Student Suspension, which is now accessed by 12 different school districts for adolescents who get a non-punitive intervention and really do find out like why they're vaping, what it is that they're vaping, what the chemicals are, and really try to find a different therapeutic, non-punitive way to get them to look at their substance use just for marijuana. And I mean, there's other substances involved, but so among adolescents 12 to 17 and young adults 18 to 25 who vaped any substance in the past month, 4/5 vaped nicotine, which is about 80% of adolescents 12 to 17 and about 82% of young adults 18 to 25. About 1/3 of them also vaped marijuana. So about 35% of adolescents 12 to 17 and about 40% of young adults 18 to 25. So we do have a lot of vaping of nicotine and marijuana happening in that age group. And I am going to focus on the 12 to 17 as well as the 18 to 25 because even though we're looking at the adolescents, as we know, the maturation rates of the brain developmentally really kind of go up until the age of 25 or even 30 in some circumstances. So this is what they're vaping. As you can see, 12 to 17, most of them are using nicotine, less tobacco products, but if you look at 26 or older, it turns into more tobacco products and less nicotine. So this is mental health and substance use levels among people aged 12 or older in 2021. 61.2 million people, or 29% of the population, used illicit drugs in the past year. The most commonly, no big surprise, is going to be marijuana, which 52 million people used, and that's nearly two out of 5 young adults in the ages of 18 to 25 used illicit drugs. That's 1 in 3 adults 18 to 25 who used marijuana in the past year, and 9.2 million people 12 or older misused opioids in the past year. 46.3 million 12 or older, or 16.5% of the population, met the DSM-5 criteria for having a substance use disorder in the past year. So just think about that. That's 16.5% of people 12 or older have met the DSM-5 criteria, which is the criteria that you meet. It's called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and it has a substance use that give you a whole different, like a barrage of what you can look at. What do you call that? Assessments to see whether or not you meet the criteria for a substance use disorder. And that was the number that they came up with, including 29.5 million people who were classified as having an alcohol use disorder and 24 million people who would classified as having a drug use disorder. This percentage of people were classified in the past use, including alcohol or drug was highest among the ages of 18 to 25 compared to anyone 26 or older. So once again, that 18 to 25 group has the highest rates of use, and that's what we need to really look at. In 2021, 94% of people age 12 or older had a substance use disorder, did not receive treatment. Like, think about that number. So 94% met the DSM-5 criteria for a substance use disorder, whether it's alcohol use disorder or whether it's going to be drug use disorder, and did not get treatment. 1 in 5 adolescents, this is talking about major depressive episodes, and 1 in 5 adolescents met the criteria for a major depressive episode. And what that means is that this just causes major impairment for kids not going to school. This means that they don't want to play their sports. They don't want to participate in activities that typically found joy. So this is 1 in 5. So if you're looking at a typical high school with 1,000 students, what's that number? 200 of those students could be potentially struggling with a major depressive episode. So that's a pretty big number. And the prevalence of major depressive episodes among Black and Asians was lowered compared to the adolescents for most other racial ethnic group. And more than half of the youth who did meet that criteria for a major depressive episode did not receive treatment. And this is mental illness among adults. I was listening to NPR a few weeks ago, and I was trying to find the statistic. I couldn't find the statistic, but they were saying for Gen Zs, which are ages 8 to 25, 8 to 23, 8 to 25, something like that, they were saying 50 to 60% of them met the criteria for the DSM-5 for anxiety. I didn't find that data, but this is the data that they had. 1 in 4 adults 18 or older, and 1 in 3 among ages 18 to 25 had a mental illness in the past year. That's 1/3 of people from the ages of 18 to 25 and 1 in 4 of 18 and older. So adults with serious mental illness had higher rates of treatment compared to those with any mental illness. Despite having the highest rates of serious mental illness in that age group of 18 to 25, they had their lowest participation in treatment. And once again, the co-occurring, so you always have the chicken or the egg. You don't know which one is coming first, whether it's going to be mental health or substance use. So the co-occurring substance use and mental health, 13.5% of young adults 18 to 25 had met the criteria for a substance disorder for any mental illness in the past year. 1 in 3 adults had a substance use disorder and any mental illness, and 46% of young adults 18 to 25 had either a substance use disorder and any mental illness. This percentage of adults 18 or older who met criteria for both in the past 2 years was higher among multiracial adults than white, Black, Hispanic, Latino, or Asian adults. Serious thoughts of suicide. And this is really hard for me because I think those of us sitting around this table right now can think of those faces of people who were in our classrooms or in our offices, and that this has been another epidemic that has pretty much gone unseen, but we've all been to those funerals, and that's hard for us. So among adolescents to age 12 to 17, in 2021, 12.7% or 3.3 million people had serious thoughts of suicide. 5.9% or 1.5 million people made a plan, and 3.4% attempted suicide in the past year. However, this is thought to be conservative because the questions for respondents 12 to 17 included response options such as "I'm not sure" or "I don't want to answer." So even though these numbers seem super high, they're actually underreported. So if you think of 3.4%, once again, you're thinking of a 1,000-person high school, 3.5% of those three or four kids actually attempted suicide in the past year. Those numbers are staggering. And I'm going to talk a little bit about suicide, thoughts of suicide, suicide plans, and suicide attempts. So it's the second leading cause of death among the young people from 10 to 14, and the third leading cause of death among those in 15 to 24 in the United States. It's the 12th leading cause of death all over in the US. 46% of people who die by suicide had a diagnosed mental health illness. 90% of people who die by suicide have experienced symptoms of mental health condition, according to interviews with family, friends, and medical professionals. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth are 4 times, please remember this, 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their straight counterparts. 79% of people who die by suicide are male. Transgender adults are nearly 9 times more likely to attempt suicide at some point in their lifetime compared to the general population. And the annual prevalence of serious thoughts by suicide demographically are 4.9% of all adults, 11.3% of young adults aged 18 to 25, 18.8% of high school students, and 45% of LGBTQIA youth. So I ask everyone when I do in this, is it your job? Is it your job to address this? You know, you're a guidance counselor, you're a teacher, you're an administrator. Is it your job? No, but I truly believe it is a moral imperative to find someone that can get this information and work with people together to find the solution. So no, it's not in your job description. You're never going to see it in your job description, but it's right in front of you. And for me, it feels irresponsible not to address this. So why are we not addressing this? What are some barriers? So these are some suggestions. Where I'm also part of a Mass 2 call for some of the prevention coalitions. And this is some information that we got through focus groups for adolescents. And they were saying there should be a mandatory assembly. This is them saying we should have a mandatory assembly for all parents. I know this is we can't do that. Create safe spaces in our communities for parents to have discussions. Mandatory professional development for all school staff. Mental health first aid, teen mental health first aid and suicide training for school staff. And community branding for resources. They don't know where the resources are, and if they do, they can't access them. And resources found in nurses, counseling offices, and administration, and handled with care envelopes. So, I don't know, this must have been back in the 90s when I first started teaching. I mean, I was a teacher, I was teaching science. We had these things called the red envelopes. And there was a red envelope on our desk. This is like pre-email, right? I don't know if anyone else remembers this. But you would have a red envelope and have a kid's name in it. It didn't have any other information, but you would know if you had this red envelope and it had this young person's name in it, that you needed to handle them with care. So I've been to a lot of funerals for people who have lost their lives to substance use and mental health, and I can't help then think about this one woman, this one little girl. She was 21 years old, and she died by overdose. and I'm not going to tell you her name. But in the morning, she had such debilitating anxiety that sometimes I had to pick her up in the morning. She used to make me wait forever and a day. And she'd get in the car and she'd be so bubbly and perky. And I'm like, oh my gosh, just get in the car. You know, you just maybe wait another 15 minutes. And 15 minutes late, and inevitably, she's like, can I get a coffee? And I couldn't say no to her because I'm soft. And so we would stop and get a coffee, and I would be 20 minknow late every single day. And I picked up this kid probably for a year and a half because she couldn't get in the van, or she missed the van, and I happened to go past her house anyway. So, you know, when she lost her life at 21, I'm standing in her funeral, and there's a lot of people there, right? A lot of people coming through, a lot of former teachers, a lot of former, she was a special ed student, former special ed people. Her district really cared about her, obviously, they're all there too. And all I can think about was, and they all said, like, we saw this coming. That's what they keep saying. I go to these funerals and I stand there, and a lot of people go like, yeah, we saw it coming. Well, why didn't we talk about it? Like, why didn't we if we have those red envelopes, if something happened in that child's life and that caused some trauma in that child's life, hand the red envelope up to the next level. So if you're a 5th grade teacher and something happened in that child's life and you had to file a 51A or CMP, whatever that was, why is that information not getting translated up to the next level, whether it's in middle school, whether it's the middle school to the high school? Like, these red envelopes were all over the floor in this child's, when I was at her funeral, and all I could think of was like, there's just red envelopes everywhere. And I never saw them. I never got the red envelopes. And if I'd gotten the red envelopes, my intervention with this child and her family may have been different. So we got to start handing out those red envelopes. We got to start talking to a bit, and not to break any HIPAA, FERPA, any of that stuff, but we've got to hand over the red envelopes. And we've got to switch our dialogue to what's the matter with you, to what happened to you. So I don't know if many of you have seen this. This is the expanded ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences questionnaire. And this is what we give at my PASS program to adolescents. There was a young woman who I was there earlier in this year, and she was walking out. They have an assessment. All of my students get assessed. They get a depression assessment. They get anxiety. They get an ACEs, which is this, Adverse Childhood Experiences or Trauma. They also get an SI, and then they get substance use. And so this expanded ACEs questionnaire, this young woman had just taken this. And she walked out and she's crying, and I was like, what's going on? And she's like, nobody's ever asked me these questions. And I was like, yeah, these are pretty tough questions to look at. So I'm gonna give you a minute to look through some of these. And have you ever experienced being sworn at, insulted frequently, put down or verbally? Have you ever watched your parent be pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had anything thrown at them, or been so hard hit they had a mark? Have you been a victim of violence? Has anyone fondled or touched you inappropriately? I'm not gonna go through all of these. But I really challenge you to think about having these conversations. Obviously, these are hard conversations for a teacher to have with 30 students in their classroom. I get it. But you know, it wouldn't be a bad idea to be able to send them somewhere where they could be able to have these brave conversations, because the reality is if they score significantly in this subject, in this questionnaire, their chances of having a full and healthy lifestyle are much less than their counterparts who'd have a lower ACEs score. I'm going to show you that in a minute. So I have an ACEs score of 7, and that's pretty high. And the only thing that saved me was people looking out for me as an adolescent. I had good teachers. I was the first one in my family to go to college. And the only thing that buffered my ACEs score were people who looked out for me, that I had a relationship with, a true relationship, a trusting relationship. It was a science teacher and it was a guidance counselor. And those people, I attribute them, and also my friend group changed from my middle school to my high school. And those are the 3 factors, right? Because you know, as soon as you turn 10, your parents' information doesn't matter anymore. It's everything externally. So we've got to be able to have these conversations. And like I said, if it weren't for those 3 factors, I wouldn't be sitting here today. This is the impact if you have multiple ACEs. So the first one, in the blue there, you can see the higher the ACEs score, the higher the impact is that you'll be somehow addicted to drugs. And also the ACEs score, the more it increases. So an ACEs score of 4 or more, you're 12 times more likely to have attempted suicide, 7 times more likely to be an alcoholic, and 10 times more likely to have injected a street drug. An ACEs score of 6 or higher, you've already shortened your lifespan by 20 years. I have 7. What does ACEs look like in our schools? And I think this is really important, that 6 students probably have no ACEs, right? 5 have 1, 6 have 2, 3 have 3, 7 have 4 or 5, and 3 students in a typical classroom are gonna have an ACEs score of 6 or greater. You just have to think about that. So those are those kids that you know already completely don't have protective factors, that they have huge risk factors, and how are we reaching them in our schools, in our classrooms? So this is the book that I got from my friend Ray Ellen, and it's called Holding Space. I could never name, there's this space that you have when you're struggling with substance use or mental health. And this is what we do when we walk alongside a person on a journey through liminal space. Let me tell you what liminal space is. Liminal space is when you don't know how it's going to end. So she starts this book out where her mother had just passed away, and you can't see an end to grief. But I feel like I work with people who are always liminal. They're not only, whether it's grief or whether it's when you're in active substance use or active mental health, or I had a student who had a panic attack in my room the other day, and I had to figure out a way to make him feel less liminal. You don't know when it's going to end. You don't know when it's going to end. And you have to be able to name it. And you have to say, you're liminal. That means you can't see an end. It's my job to make sure that you know that this is an end. So we're going to try to do this without making them feel inadequate. We're not trying to fix them. We're not trying to impact the outcome. We just open our hearts, offer support, and let go of judgment and control. The way that she says, the way that she identified liminal space, which I think is when we're holding space in more complex situations, we're holding space as an in-between space. It's strange, vast, and sometimes uncomfortable, almost always uncomfortable, and a space full of complex and also often overlapping emotions. Our period, which has some social hierarchy, culture, tradition, identity, has been dissolved, and a new thing has not yet emerged to take its place. It's the period of uncertainty, ambiguity, restlessness, fear, discomfort, and anguish. And it's that place where you're on a trapeze and you're just letting go and you don't know if you're going to hit that next one. And I think that that is a great way to think about, like I said, active mental health or substance use or suicide ideation is you just don't know if you're going to hit that second trapeze. Here's some guidelines. Allow people to trust their own intuition and wisdom. Give them as much information as they can handle. Don't take their power away. Keep your ego out of it. Help them feel safe enough to fail. Give guidance and humility with thoughtlessness. Create a container for complex emotions, fear and trauma. Allow them to make different decisions than you would have made yourself. And when a person is liminal, these are the three things you have to remind them. This isn't personal. You didn't do this, you didn't cause this isn't personal. It's not pervasive, which means not everyone's going to be feeling the same way, and definitely it's not permanent. But the biggest thing is the space between liminal space and mattering theory, because we can't hold space for these children when we know they need us to hold space for them without this connection, and their children need to know they matter. So I've been doing this deep dive into all this mattering and this Albert Bandura and Rosenberg and McCullough, and this stuff has been around literally for 60 years. Like this started back in the 60s. This isn't anything new, but it's new to me. And when I'm always looking for a way to name what I believe is true. And these are persons who developed theoretical models on years and years of data and research. So this isn't something like, oh, Michelle just thought of this really awesome thing. It's really steeped in data and research. And so there's three levels of mattering. There's the see me, the know me, and the need me. And we need to, for people to really trust us, to develop that relationship, we got to get to that need me. The see me is awareness, the know me is importance, and the need me is reliance. So if we don't get to that need me, we're never going to be able to get to that connection, to that real rapport that you're going to have with that adolescent where they can truly believe you and trust you, and they're going to be able to listen to you when they're in crisis. So this is the see me, right? I notice you, I know your name, I'm aware of your presence, I focus attention on you, I don't ignore you. That's the first part of, and this is what we do with pretty much all of our students. I could pretty much say with anyone I see on a field or in a classroom, I'm going to be able to say that I'm aware of you. Then the second level of this is, like I said, it's kind of going up into levels of importance. I'm the object of others' concern. I invest resources in you. I promote your welfare. I'm attentive to your needs. I can provide emotional support. I take pride in you. I care about what you do. I criticize you for your own good, which I thought was really interesting. The inconvenience, I can inconvenience myself for you, and I see you as an ego extension, and I can listen to you. And this is reliance. Like I said, this is the meat and potatoes of the mattering theory. This is when you can really do some work with young people or with anyone in general to get them to make a change in their lives. And this is what reliance looks like. They seek your advice. They depend on you. They seek support from you. They seek resources from you. They need you. They miss you. They trust you to be there, and you value their contribution. These are hard things, especially if you're working in, like I said, I'm thinking a classroom teacher. When I was a science teacher, I had 150 students, and not every student needs this connection, right? We're just trying to reach those kids who maybe have a high ACEs score, who we know have other contributing factors that need more support. Those are the ones we need to try to deepen our relationship with them to this self-reliance of mattering theory. So Janice Whitlock also was another researcher, and she talked about the youth's sense of belonging, meaning, and connection. To the degree of which youth perceive they are cared for, trusted, and respected by adults individually and collectively. This captures whether they possess a sense of place, respect, and this belonging comes from believing that one and others like themselves are valued members of society. And this is where the community is so important. This isn't a school issue. Can I just say that again? This is not a school issue. This is a community-wide issue. This is what she found. The nature and quality of youth and young adult exchanges. Among them are anonymous adults, perceived acceptance and being welcomed in public spaces. This is what youth have to feel. Perceived like they're welcomed in public spaces, specifically businesses and adults on the street in the neighborhood. So if you're a person walking down the street and you see a group of kids walking towards you, acknowledge them. Tell them hello. God, how are you guys doing? How's school going? And just have a conversation with them. Don't just walk past them like they're nothing. The availability of outlets for creative engagement and group involvement and expression. I happen to know that you guys have a great YMCA. I love Chris. He is an amazing executive director. He does everything he can to try to engage youth, and hats off to him and other like-minded organizations in the community. I'm sure there's millions of them I don't know about. Opportunities for meaningful involvement and input into community institutions. Do you have students on your school board? Do you have students involved in city council? Do you have students, like I said, involved in community institutions? And the knowledge of community events and youth impact on community policy practices. And this is, once again, the Mattering Connect Disempowerment part of this. So long established and successful youth organizations have demonstrated decreased in problem behaviors or increase in civic engagement or positive developmental supports like Big Sisters, Big Brothers, Service Learning App, Teen Reach, 4-H, whatever. But here's the deal. It's not the program. You know what it is? It's the person in the program. You can have the best program, fidelity, validate, everything perfect, and it's the person in front of them. So no matter what you're doing, make sure you're making sure that that person is facilitated by a skilled worker, a teacher. All of our mentors, all of our teachers, all of our coaches should be those mentors where they can feel that they're safe. Anyway. Oh, there's 40 developmental assets, which are assets that adolescents know that they can use in order to get more stable and they can have a better life. So these empowerment assets include community values youth have roles, volunteers in the community, and safety. Safety. This is the hard one, right? Youth feels at home, safe at home, in school, and in your community. And I'm just going to put it out there because it's ugly, and I'm just going to say it, school shootings, right? This wasn't a thing. This wasn't a thing when I was growing up. I felt safe at school. I didn't have to go through what, the police have to come into our schools and have to do these trainings. And I can tell you right now that has really destabilized a lot of our students, feeling unsafe at school. I mean, I can't tell you how many, gun incidents that people are calling in, and we have to go and make sure, it's just destabilizing. It has changed the safety of schools. Schools used to be the safest place on earth, and since this has started a couple of decades ago, it's really destabilized our students. And so I'm not sure what the answer is for that, and I'm hoping, law enforcement can handle this, but we've got to figure out how to work together to make the students feel more safe at schools. And once again, it's just the importance of community. Youth are empowered to the extent they feel valued, feel the others that view them as resources, and make contributions to the larger whole at which they feel they belong and feel fundamentally, physically, and emotionally threats of their safety. So what do we do? Number one, this is why we created the PASS program, which has been used by about this year, probably 400 to 500 students. Judgment-free assessments, kind of like the one I showed you. Using motivational interviewing. One thing we don't do is when somebody's in front of you and you look like they're struggling, you don't go wow, you look like you're struggling. Yeah, no crap, they're struggling. So we don't have to name it. We just have to say, hey, I see you, okay? We just have to see them, but we don't have to name it. Don't use the word addiction. I think you might be struggling with addiction. Because guess what? When you're struggling with addiction or mental health, you know it. Nobody really needs to tell you about it. So on the ugly, say, hey, you know what? I know a lot of people who are struggling right now. Let's talk about this. Ask the hard questions. Do you need some help? And you know what? Show them that they matter. And this is the biggest thing about the outcomes of shame and regret. So this is the reason people don't get better. Shame, stigma, and regret. This is the outcome of it: social isolation, secrecy. Guess what? You're not going to have a parent who thinks their kid is struggling with substances walk into the principal's office and be like, little Julie here, she's smoking too much weed. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. They don't trust us. Secrecy, fear of gossip, feeling exposed. Stigma contributes to delays in seeking more help. And once again, financing treatment. And we listen to the loudest voices in the room. We don't listen to those quiet voices. So once again, if you feel like you suspect a child is experimenting with substances, talk to them. Kaiser Permanente Division of Research shows that children who had trauma or stress-related diagnosis before the age of 12 are 23% likely than other children to develop a substance use program in their teens. If they had a self-harm diagnosis, they were 5 times more likely. So when we're sitting in these IEP meetings, right, and we know that they have been through a stressful situation, they're getting diagnosed with depression, anxiety, ADHD, all those precursors to addiction when they're 12 years old, why can't we have that conversation that says, and just so you know, your kid is 5 times more likely to love weed? So when that happens, let's have that conversation. Why can't we have these honest conversations when we're in these just non-judgmental, stigmatizing situations and say like, hey, you know what, doc, I notice your kid's smoking too much. When you give a diagnosis of any type of anxiety, depression, or mental illness, you should say your child is more likely to love substances, because it's going to do exactly what substances do, which is make them feel better. And these are some early signs of risk that may predict drug use. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. A lack of attachment or nurturing, ineffective parenting, a parent who abuses drugs. Poor classroom behavior, social skills, these are what you're going to see at school, academic failure, association with drug-using peers, and other factors such as drug availability, trafficking patterns, beliefs that drug use is tolerated, and risks that can influence young people to start using drugs. So I always say in our schools, it's called the A's, the B's, and the C's. So I can tell the 3 predictors are their academic performance or their attendance, their behaviors, and the changes in their appearance and peers. The A's, the B's, and the C's. It's pretty easy. If you have those things going on, the A's, the B's, and the C's, the chances of that kid identifying it as using substances to maybe whatever degree are pretty high. I mean, the highest one is association with drug using peers, though. Just want to really put that out there. If you see little Johnny who was doing this before and has now a new peer group, and those peers, that chances that Johnny's using are probably pretty high. What can you do right now? Parents gives you information on the risk and protection to help develop positive prevention action. Educators can strengthen learning and bonding at school to reduce aggressive behaviors and poor concentration. And community leaders can assess community risk and protective factors associated with drug problems to best target prevention services. So once again, this is not a school issue. Right? I was a former school board member. I was on the school board for 4 years. I've served on my city council now for 6 years, so I've been involved in local politics for 10 years. And I can tell you I've never had one parent that's come in front of me and said, you need to fund a prevention program. You need to fund an early intervention program. If you came to my city council meeting and you said, I want to start something at my high school, and here's what it looks like, and here's how much it costs, I would probably try to get that through. But nobody talks about it. So start to talk about it at that level. So when you're starting a prevention program at the school committee or school board, whatever y'all have here, start talking about this. Start to saying, like, we have a problem, and not because we have a problem because it's superintendent's fault. It's not, because we just are coming out of an epidemic, and I just showed you the data. Everyone knows what this is, right? This triangle. What does it mean? It means LGBTQIA. It means somebody who wants to have a conversation. I was trained on this back in the 1990s to be a person identified as a teacher, and I put this in my window of my classroom, and kids who were having sexuality issues would come and seek me out. I also had to do a meeting. I think I held a meeting like twice a month. I got a $500 stipend. It was nice. I did some trainings. But I was a safe space. They created safe spaces for kids who, you know who did this? Kevin Jennings. He was a former Safe and Supportive Schools director for the United States Department of Education. And I was at a meeting with him about 10 years ago. And I was just in awe of him, because I'm like, you did the rainbows. Like, that's amazing to me. And I go, what did you do? He goes, I was a history teacher in Lexington, Massachusetts, and I'm an openly gay man. And a lot of kids were struggling with suicide ideation and other issues because they had nobody to talk to about their sexuality issues. So I just started making triangles. I'm like, you just started making triangles? He's like, yeah, I just started making triangles. I was like, what did you do then? And so then we had this really great conversation, and he said, well, you're trying to solve this with mental health and substance use. He said, make your own thing. So my business partner and I came up with this. It's a little sticker that you can have. It's called I Can Help. And try to find, we do trainings for people who need information on how to work with adolescents who are struggling with their substance use and mental health. And what we do is we try to create a bridge to services. So once we meet with a student, they trust us, we establish safe spaces so we can talk to a trusted report, have a trusted adult in the community, and create these places where kids know when they see this, they know that this is a safe person. We're not just gonna be like, judgy, nope. We're gonna say, okay, I'm yours, sit down, let's talk. And if I can't solve it, I'm gonna go to one of these guys or someone else in the room and we're gonna solve it together. But it's not just gonna fall on me. Because the problem is, we're not reaching the kids who need us. And that's what, they don't know they have a problem. So it's our job to be their brain, right? We know the prefrontal cortex isn't exactly connected properly in adolescence. So we are their brakes, and they don't have any brakes. So, and if they're using substances, that's even wired even differently. So they don't even know they have a problem. They don't realize that we can help them. So we have these two, one is for substance biopsychosocial issues and the other one's for addictive behavior and issues. And these, I have a bunch of posters, they all kind of say the same thing, and there's crisis statements embedded in each of these. And so if we put these up and say nurses' offices or administrative offices, and if a kid said, hey, what does this mean? And you could say, well, I don't know, how many of those do you have on there? They're taken from actual crisis statements from other assessments. And so you could say like, well, I have 2 of those. Oh, which 2 do you have? Oh, talk to me about that. Let's have a conversation. When you have 3 or 4, we need to have a bigger conversation, because the more of these that you start to, once again, if a person is walking themselves into a substance use or a mental health issue, they're going to start increasing these as they progress, right? So as they become a freshman to a sophomore, or maybe 7th to an 8th grader, they're going to start adding some of these to whatever they're struggling with. So one of them says, I feel sad and lonely, maybe I'd be better off if I weren't here, nothing makes me feel better, I can't focus, everything upsets me, I don't feel safe anywhere, that's the crisis statement, I don't have any friends, I get angry, I just don't feel like myself anymore. And then once again with the addictive behavior and issues, when I was high, I almost got caught, alcohol and drug has changed my relationship with my family and peers, that's a crisis statement, I use alcohol and drugs when I'm alone, crisis statement, maybe this is out of control, I've tried to quit but can't, crisis statement, I'm missing classes and my grades are going down the tubes. So I know we work with really complex adolescents, and I guess the only reason I do this is because I know that if we do that, we get this, right? We get these kids who start to trust in themselves, and they start to believe in themselves, and they start to make plans for themselves to have a safe and productive life. They actually believe us. Like, we can actually be people that can change the trajectory of a kid's life. So much data and research has gone into what is the one protective factor that a person needs in order to get from this bad situation to be able to believe that they're capable of having a self-directed life. One person. That's all it takes, one individual. And guess what? When you give that to them, you make this. This person, they help other people. They become a natural helper. So when you start to give them unconditional love, respect, empathy, and compassion, they start to show that to others.
Michelle, we really want to thank you for that presentation. I'd have to say I was starting to have a panic attack as I'm seeing the statistics, and felt, as I'm sure a lot of parents and school administrators do, almost overwhelmed by the problem. And maybe that's the reason people don't confront it, because it's so overwhelming and so tragic. But a couple of things I thought about as you're doing this. My daughter is a 6th grade school teacher and deals in a very affluent school system in Acton, but deals with problems like this, and they rise at that surface to behavior. And I got thinking, and I asked you in the break, how many of these kids have dual diagnosis of both substance abuse and behavior issues, but of course that's as they get older. They don't seem to hit attention until the behavior becomes so disruptive that somebody's got to do something. And I was struck thinking, and I kept pushing the timeline younger and younger and younger, and thinking of the relationships these kids have with their parents, with their families, and what so much of that leads to. And I don't know the role for pre-K, and maybe this is an argument that we would benefit by pre-K as well to help with parenting, but where do you see us starting in the parent phase of this when kids are young? I'm a preventative guy. I mean, I treated disease forever, but I always try to figure out how can I prevent it. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking this, what do we need to do as a society to prevent as well as treat?
I mean, for me, I think we kind of put our heads in the sand a lot of the time, knowing what's happening at home, and we don't ask those questions. And so if we know like a parent is using or maybe struggling with their substance use, or this child has, experienced some trauma, we might find out about the trauma. However, we don't react to it in a way that's like, for me, it's just protecting them, like throw every protective factor you can. And I would really venture to guess what the other counselors would say as well.
Should all of our students have an ACE questionnaire done at some time in their life?
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
everyone, just like we do a screening tool, which is called the CRAFT, which is my favorite thing ever. For substance use, I think everyone should have an ACEs, like throughout multiple times. So it's not like a surprise, like when you go into 9th grade, you're gonna get the CRAFT and see if you're using substances. Like it should be an ongoing tool that's used to inform what that child is going through.
So some of the statistics I've seen, 10% of kids have had some sexual abuse in their growing up, which is probably, again, underreported.
At least, yeah.
So what's the responsibility of, and I'll ask some of the panelists from schools, if you do an ACE and you see a child answer yes to sexual abuse, is it the law that they get reported to the police? I'm curious where that goes. Anybody?
Well, I'm not sure if we're not actually implementing the ACEs, if we know the answer to that question. I guess it would be part of the protocols for it. But anytime that a report like that is made to any of us as mandated reporters, then that's immediately reported to DCF. So not really directly to the police, but to DCF to start the ball rolling from there.
I'm struck with, when we're looking at the statistics, at the absolute volume that we're faced with. And we're sitting here with people working very, very hard to deal with a crisis that, with the numbers of people designated to address it, the counselors, the administrators of the school, we can't possibly respond to each kid who, when we look at it through Michelle's lens, would really benefit from some early intervention. And so I'm trying to figure out how to stretch our reach, how to be able to reach those kids above and beyond what we're already doing. And I'd love to hear people's input on that. I think we all agree with the need, but right now you've got to reach a pretty big crisis to get to counseling. And we just recognize that we should be responding before then. How do we do that?
I need it right. So at the middle school level, we have a student support team. And Officer Perna is a member of the middle school student support team, myself, along with our school principal, school nurse, guidance counselors, school psychologist. I don't think I'm leaving anybody out. And we meet every Wednesday morning for, a lot of times the meeting is scheduled for about an hour and a half, but it runs 2, sometimes longer than that hours, because we get to talking. And the goal is to just make sure we have that sacred time every single week to talk about, discuss, and take a team approach to solve whatever issues our students are dealing with. I would say a lot of times the student issues we're dealing with are a lot of the things that Michelle mentioned, not quite rising to the level of substance abuse. I think it's a lot of those precursors, a lot of the things she talked about, those ABCs. And what we're trying to do is to put forth the best approach and interventions for that student at that time to make them feel supported, to make them feel seen, and to make sure that they know that they have trusted adults in our building that they can go to and share information with. And it doesn't have to be me, it doesn't have to be the principal, it doesn't have to be a guidance counselor. It can be whatever adult they click with and feel comfortable with, because that's who they're going to trust to share information with. And again, like Joe mentioned, everybody that works in the school is a mandated reporter, and if certain information is shared with them, they'll escalate it and we'll notify the appropriate organizations to get support in place.
I think that part of what Michelle was saying earlier, that it's not just a school issue, that there needs to be more talk about this in the community as well, I think is a big stumbling block that sometimes we find at the high school, is getting more involvement from families or from the community at large. But speaking similarly to what we are trying to do at the high school, we have our MTSS teams that we meet every week to really help come up with plans for our most at-risk students, whether that be academically, attendance, behavior, which again are all things, precursors for a larger issue. Another thing that we've recently been trying to implement are restorative justice circles, where I have found in my experience that some of the maybe negative behaviors that we see from students in high school are due to a lack of them feeling that their voice is heard in a productive way. And so restorative justice circle is a place to create a safe but also a brave space for students to come and hear from one another as well. And so I have conducted them both staff and students together so we can build community and feel that there is a sense of belonging to a place that students spend a large portion of their week together. And such a valuable space where we have so many educated professionals in one building as well, that we all can learn from one another. So that's something that's still very grassroots. We have some staff that are going to be trained at the end of this month actually in restorative circles through the Suffolk University Center for Restorative Justice, so that we hopefully can start letting it permeate more throughout the building and not just in once every other week type of situations where students can do that with one another. So I'm not blind to think that it's going to solve the problem, but I think being able for students to be able to harness their voice in a productive way and to feel that there is support in more than just hey, I need to learn algebra is really important because of the time that they spend together in our building.
Mind if I add one more thing? I think the challenge that we have in the schools there's so many competing priorities, and over the years we've seen this issue become more and more prominent and more of a need for support for our students. We've added guidance staff over the years as we've felt that need, but there's also other things so many things that happen at school. It's not just supporting students in this way. It's academics, it's extracurriculars, it's athletics. It's a lot of competing priorities, and so the school's always open to more connections and supports that we can integrate into the way we support students. I know programs like PASS have been a real plus for us in ways to kind of support students that aren't punitive and provide that support in different ways than have historically happened in schools, I think.
That's a question to Leanne. I was talking with one of the students last year when she was applying to college, and she was telling me she was a member of, I believe it was a peer support group, that students would be identified and they were safe kids to come and talk with. And I was so impressed by what she was saying. Can you tell me a little more about that?
So actually, Ms. Starrett might be able to share a little bit more. I know, but we don't currently, that might have been something that happened pre-pandemic that has somewhat not gotten its way back up and running again. But it is something that we're working on to, for example, a lot of our National Honor Society students helped organize and basically facilitated the 8th grade transition program to get 8th graders acclimated to the high school as freshmen. But we have plans to kind of create that beyond what National Honor Society students are doing, where there'll be a student mentor that's assigned to advisories, as an example, and that they could be kind of a go-to person and have regular meetings with that group of students and create that mentorship with them. Just admittedly not something that we have up and running right now.
I'd like to sort of take the discussion one step further and have us put on our thinking caps and think about how we can draw the community, the parents, the businesses, government, recreation department, we have the why. What other community assets can we bring to bear on this outside the school to just help this effort, which clearly exceeds the capacity of any school system to deal with as much as we really ought to be dealing with it. So, do you think there's enough interest from parents? That's why we're putting on programs like this, to show the need. And if so, can we train them to do this effectively? Is that a fool's errand, or is it a real possibility. I guess I'd put that to you, Michelle. Do you see that as something that could be done through an organization like I Can Help? Or would a teen center with a director with a lot of this kind of training and a staff with that kind of training add another element in town that would be useful? Would the churches, youth groups, be good places to kind of bring this kind of thinking to bear? I know that the intent crosses over a great deal in all those places, but how do we focus the effort and make it more effective in the community? Simple question.
Oh, sure. I think it's all of it. I mean, I think when we talk about silos, there's no magic panacea. There's no magic answer that's going to be, that's due. I mean, we saw in my own community in Dover, New Hampshire, we saw there was an increase in the number of bullying. And so I worked with some of the students and we put "Hate Has No Home" in Dover. Like we made signs, like yard signs that people put in their yards that says "Hate Has No Home" in Dover. Like, we're going to address this system-wide. We're not going to tolerate it. Like, little things can make a huge impact. And I just think if you see a kid who, you know, and has I could show you the signs that we made, but just like I said, the communities all over Dover have the "Hate Has No Home" in Dover sign in their business. And so you see that, or the "I Can," whatever. It's all of it. There's no one thing you can do. It's all of it. And that's what I would say, that increase the number of, you know, opportunities at the YMCA, increase after school activities, you know, my daughter was a basketball player, and I remember before one of their championship games, the coach said, "Okay, now don't overdo it tonight." And I was like, "What was that? Don't overdo it tonight." Like, I know there's a big party. I don't want the girls to overdo it. I was like, "No, it's don't do it tonight." Like, it's like, but I think once again, our language really matters. And that's what I think we need to really tell people, that like, you're a coach, people look up to you. You can't say that. You can't have a Budweiser keychain on your flip flop. You can't do that. Like, I just think little things matter. Or if you had something.
Sure. I'm a firm believer in, like, I want to call it grassroots, but like organic, things being organic. So starting small and like letting it gain its own teeth almost, so that it feels more natural than. So I mean, I guess one example I'm thinking of is, especially in a high school, and I don't know, that young adult adolescent phase is something that makes a lot, in my conversations with people, like people that don't work with high school students regularly or have much interaction are always like, "Ooh, like how do you talk with them? How do you, I don't know, like," and so it's uncertainty, it's unknown of like what's the best path forward, and so we have a group of very eager seniors that are wanting to create a community service day for the high school in the spring, where every student goes out into the community and is performing community service with community members. And so they're putting together different possibilities of where we can go. And I think something like that is an example of like this organic, okay, let's get the adults and the young adults working together. Let's let them break down that barrier of like, ooh, how do you work with them, you know? And that perhaps that could start conversation and like more insight into what that our population of young adults needs or what they're experiencing, and it just doesn't feel so scary to like even have those conversations with students. Just a thought.
I think in Ipswich there are a wide range of extracurricular after-school activities for students. There's the Y, there's churches, there's, you know, basketball leagues, there's summer camps in the summer, there's the beach to go to. You know, there's a lot of options for kids outside of school time. I think what's a bit more challenging and in my opinion the toughest problem to solve is for the students, that those red envelope students you were talking about, those students that, you know, you wish you could spend, you know, a whole week working with that one student or spending time with them, you know, putting in the time, putting in the effort to build that relationship, to get it to the point where they trust you and they're relying on you for things. Those are the really challenging situations, those students that need more intensive support. And you know, the only way to build trust in those relationships over time is to spend time with those people. And you know, time is of the essence, and it's hard because everybody has different priorities and getting pulled in different directions. And so if there was a way, you know, the schools, we know who those students are. We know who, you know, if you could stop time for a day, you know who you'd spend that time with. It's if there were individuals, adults in the community that were willing to, you know, put their own lives aside to spend time with these people. It's the kids that come in on Monday morning, and, you know, so many of our students have, you know, very similar experiences on weekends. They do fun things with their families, they're with friends, they're different places, traveling, things like that. It's that student that's nervous about what are they going to say to their friends on Monday morning, you know, what their weekend was like, you know, because either they're embarrassed or ashamed or it just wasn't good. You know, people that are willing to spend time with kids in order to build those relationships and become those trusted adults is hard to come by, and those are tough problems to solve.
On that line of trusted adults, and you were talking about building that trust, it dawned on me as these kids graduate from their trust in you, what's there for them next?
I think this was part of like my past program when we do the reentry. Part of that is who are you going to connect with? It says in the school and in the community. And so we always make sure our students have, you know, community partners. We have them meet with recovery counselors or recovery coaches in the community. We also have 12-step program. I mean, so it's a little bit different for my students versus talking about your students. But I do think the biggest part of my reentry plan when a student is going back to their district is I have to identify somebody in the community and in the school, and that's really, really hard for them. 50% of the kids don't have anybody. At least 50% of them can identify one person in their community or their school that they're connected to.
So it's a trusting relationship that's from their very early ages. And what kinds of things could we create that, as the schools at least early on identify kids who there isn't someone like that there is some place they can go? I mean, I think of in the old days of Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, but those are kids that are already 8 or 9 years old. They're not in kindergarten. And it's that trusting relationship, someone to take you under the wings, a mentor. How do we develop that? Because as I look backwards, so much of this is so fundamental in those formative years of relationships.
The caring people are there. I mean, I always say, back when I was in, you know, other districts and I was going to National Honor Society, you have to nominate somebody from K through 12 who's going to be your sponsor for National Honor Society, and the same people showed up every single year. Those are the people you're going to train. Do you know what I mean? Those are the people who have made an impact for some reason, have gone above and beyond. You try to find the people who are there. I don't think you have to and train them. And you know, I mean, everyone around this table cares about children. Like maybe we just don't have the same skill set. I don't know. Like, but what can we do to train the people who are there? Who are the ones showing up, and what do they have? Like, who are the that the kids are going to? What are the traits that those people have? And train other people to those traits. I mean, that's what I think. The helpers are there. They just don't know what to do.
You know, I look in the Sunday Globe every week for that Tuesday's Child, and it breaks my heart every time I read it. And said, my wife and I should step up and do that. And I go, oh, that's a lot of responsibility. Do I really want to do that? But
I have a couple of those in my school.
You just can think of that all the time.
Yeah.
Can I add to that too? I feel very grateful and honored to work in Ipswich, a small community. Being here for 18 plus years, you get to know the families, obviously, but you work also very closely with the elementary school personnel. So, you know, we meet with the counselors at the elementary level, the middle school level, the high school level. I know that we'll do transition meetings. So at the end of the year, you were talking about giving that information up, you know, giving that envelope to the next level. I know that elementary meets with the middle school counselors. I know that middle school meet with the high school counselors, and we'll talk about those families. We meet for CCI once every 2 months, so that involves the district attorney's office, but all of the representatives will come from both elementary schools, the middle school, the high school, and that's where we get to talk about, well, there's a high school student, but there's also an elementary third grade sibling. So we'll get to communicate with each other and work with one another, and I think that's so helpful too. I'm very grateful to be in a community like Ipswich for those reasons, and I also feel bad for bigger communities that might not have that sense of who's who and what the families are going through. I think working with the parents is so important, and making those phone calls to parents on a regular basis. So.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking that I'm hoping when people see this, they begin to think, what can I do about this problem? And not just how's our community, meaning them, going to handle it. And I would invite anybody and everybody who has interest to contact us at Ipswich Aware. We don't have all the resources to handle it, but we certainly can make the connections and foster the ideas that can make a difference in the community. And that's what this talk is about today, what we hope to do. And it's not the people around this table who need to hear it. It's the rest of the community, and we really need you all to step up. So this is an invitation and a challenge to the community in Ipswich to see if we can do better. And it's not that we do badly, but we need to do better. It's just what we need to do for our kids. And I think, unless somebody has some other comments, I want to end with that challenge.
I'm going to end with one other thing. And I've talked to 3 students who are applying to college in the last 2 days. 2 of them said how important their high school guidance counselor had been in the last year, not directing them where to apply to college, but to get them through the feelings and anxieties they've had from COVID. And so my hat's off to guidance counselors and the work you do.
Everybody
Thank
all
in
of
education right now deserves a hats off. Yes.
Thank you. And thank you, Michelle, for coming.
Absolutely.
This
We
has
will
been
bring you
fantastic.
back.
Thank you.
Thank you.